Okay, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's June 5th, 2019, Wednesday, and this is our another SIG CLI meeting. It has been long for weeks since we've seen each other last time. And actually, although the agenda was pretty light at the beginning of the meeting, I see it is getting a little bit more condensed. So before we'll jump to the main topics, a few announcements, or rather a feedback from the KubeCon sessions. SIG CLI had 3 sessions overall the course of the KubeCon. The first one that we held was during the Contributor Summit. It was a face-to-face. We didn't get too much people attending it, although we ended up having a very fruitful discussions around contributors. The gist of the discussion was that, first of all, we lack people, or rather, most importantly, developers that are using Windows on a daily basis, because from the discussions that we had, the majority of the developers currently contributing to kubectl are using either Linux or Mac. So these two platforms are widely covered, at least from the contributor's point of view. But roughly 40–50% of our users are actually Windows users. And unfortunately, we don't have those users covered properly. So we had a discussion with Phil, with Paris, that we will be opening or rather, we will create a blog post and we will invite people to contribute to kubectl. We are hoping to set up some kind of a mentored sessions, group mentored sessions, because we're hoping that at least a couple of folks will be interested in contributing. And from talking with Phil, with Sean before the meeting, and on SIG CLI Slack, there are multiple people interested in contributing to kubectl. So we'll try to set up a proper mentoring sessions and help those people get up to speed. There will be a separate blog post and mailing list post to get people informed about the future steps. So that's one thing. Nick Mitchell is saying, was the figure 30–40% as Windows users? These are rough estimates. We didn't do any survey, although we should probably do. My 40–50% is from the numbers that I have for OpenShift CLI, where about 40-ish, 50% users are Windows users, and these roughly estimates probably look the same for kubectl. But yeah, we definitely need to make some survey, and that's in the plans as well. For those who are already interested in contributing, we had 2 sessions during KubeCon itself. One was the introduction, where I shortly talked about what our SIG does, when and how we're meeting, and how to reach out to us. And for the remaining part of the presentation, I did the same thing as a couple of weeks back during Meet Our Contributors, which is a code walkthrough for kubectl. I am aware that we are in the process of moving kubectl over to the staging repository. But the gist of where things are to be found will be mostly the same. Only the initial part will change. So instead of package kubectl and where the commands are, the majority will be in staging, K8s.io, kubectl, and the rest will be the same. Also, Fit had a deep dive session, which mostly covered the future directions and the main objectives for our SIG in the upcoming months. So if you have a chance, have a look at both of the recordings. If you have any questions, both with regards to deep dive or intro sessions, feel free to reach out to myself, Sean, or Phil, and we'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Okay, one last final announcement is that the code freeze is in effect since last Friday. So the only changes that can currently land in Kubernetes 1.15 are release blockers or CVE fixes that just need to be included in every single release. All the future development, I won't say it is stopping, but it is being held with merging until we open the master in a couple of weeks. And that's my bad because I did not check the dates when the master will open, but I'm shooting something around 2 weeks from now. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Before we jump to the main topics, though, I would like to give Sean a chance to provide us with an update on the kubectl independence, since that's one of the major efforts that we're currently undergoing. And he just wrote down that he has to leave earlier, and we didn't manage to do a proper update last time, so I would really want to have a full-blown update from Sean before we move to the rest of the topics. Go ahead, Sean.
So we've managed to get a staging repository, a staging directory in Kubernetes that's going to be publishing into our kubectl repo. So we've got that completed. And right now it's just publishing the basics, the README, the security contacts, etc. So what some of you may have noticed is that our kubectl repo was wiped. So we have a backup of it. Don't worry about that. But in order to be able to publish into that repo from a staging directory, it had to be cleared. In fact, we can't. So from now on, we can't submit directly to the kubectl repo. If you want to submit something that belongs in the kubectl repo, you'll have to now. I put a link there for staging, and if you look down there, you'll see that there's one of the external staging areas. It has a link to kubectl, and if you click on that, it will take you to our kubectl repo. Our kubectl repo still has all of our issues, which is I think important. We were keeping track of several different. We have about 80 or 90 issues that we're still keeping track of, and we wanted to keep. And we also have 3 projects. One of those projects actually manages a prioritized or triaged bug list. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to, once we reopen, we're going to take as much of the code as possible, and there's still a couple of areas that are ineligible to be moved to staging, but we're going to get as much of the code as possible into staging. And the immediate benefit of that is that it will be much easier to reuse the kubectl code. So now that when we get the kubectl code, or as much of it as possible, into staging, it can be reused outside of Kubernetes much easier. And this has been a long time ask, especially of the apply code. There's quite a few areas that would like to use the significant logic of applying that kubectl has into their own applications. And so yeah, so that's actually a huge change now. Kubectl is moving into staging as much as we can. There are three areas that are holding us back. One is the get, which still had some connections to internal objects or internal resources. So that actually, I think once we open up, we actually can get rid of all of that because we're gonna move completely to server-side printing, and some of this client-side printing logic that was using internal resources, we can wipe that starting as soon as the master opens again. And I believe the master opens again on the 17th. That's when the 115 is scheduled to be released. Who knows whether they'll hit that date. And then the other two areas that were holding us back, one was convert, kubectl convert, which necessarily has internal resources. And we're still waiting until 117 until we can completely deprecate that. But I'm hoping that we can basically move all the code, all of kubectl code into staging except for convert. And maybe move convert into the command kubectl. Anyway, whatever we do, we hopefully, I think that we have a relatively clear path now to our kubectl independence. The last part that's holding us back is kubectl auth reconcile, which has connections to an RBAC, which is still internal, and that actually Jordan Liggett had said he was going to create a repo for RBAC. I don't know to be honest, I haven't been following what the progress is on that, but that's the last area that we have to finally clear up before we can get all of kubectl into staging, and once that happens, we can get it. It'll be published into our own repo. We're going to build kubectl in two places. We'll build it the old way, but we'll be able to also build it in our new repo and then build our new tooling, specifically better integration tests in the kubectl repo, instead of relying on the test CMD integration test, which is bash and difficult to determine when errors happen, etc. So that's our plan so far. Does anybody have any questions as to where we are right now?
One important addition to what you just said is one of the main reasons for moving gradually over to the staging repo and benefit of the staging repo is that the code that we already moved to the staging repo, nobody can mess up our dependencies, meaning
Right.
that nobody will be able to introduce a change that will break us in a way or delay our independence move, because all the checks that we have currently for inside of the staging repo ensure that nobody from within the there's no cross dependency. So no part of a kubectl can rely on the main Kubernetes repo. The other direction is fine, but we want to ensure that kubectl does not rely on the bits that are only in the main Kubernetes repo. So that's one of the reasons that we're going through this middle step, if some of you are wondering why the staging is needed or why is it helpful.
So up until now, there has not been a single graduation from staging. In other words, once you move into staging, it's supposed to be an intermediate step until you've actually cleaned up enough that you can move all of your code into this external repo, for us, the Kubernetes kubectl repo. So we intend to actually do that. Whereas others might not have, once you get into staging, you have a significant degree of independence once you're in staging. We are going to, our plan is to eventually completely move out of kubectl. Is that correct, Mache?
Yeah, that is correct. Also, during the KubeCon, I realized that there's another repository that we already have in the staging that will be required to move outside along the way, but I'm guessing that we'll just do it at once.
The
Or
CLI
rather, there are
runtime?
two. Yeah, the CLI runtime is one, and the second one is the sample CLI
Sample
plugin.
CLI? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm guessing we will move those along the way because we just need to figure out the testing and everything else first. And then once we have all those bits settled, then we will be easily able to move them away from the main repo.
So the two biggest, once we get to, this is going to be further down, much further down the road, but the biggest obstacles to actually completely moving out are going to be testing and releasing. So right now, kubectl is intimately tied to obviously a significant number of the tests in Kubernetes, and so we're going to have to figure out a strategy that Kubernetes, well, we'll probably publish kubectl into some bucket somewhere or as a Docker image that can be downloaded and used in end-to-end tests for Kubernetes. We don't know what that is yet. And then the releasing. So right now we have a versioning of kubectl and Kubernetes, which are connected. And if we're going to be releasing significantly faster, which is what we hope to do, then it's not clear how that versioning is going to work. But that's something we can address. We don't have to have that figured out now, but that's definitely something we will have to have addressed to finally move everything out of staging and into our own repo.
Yep, that is correct. Are there any questions with regard to the moves? So I think that I brought it up during our KubeCon sessions, but we repeat it. If you're interested in helping with kubectl development per se, we have a set of bash written tests that we would like to see rewritten to Go. There's a framework from SIG testing. I remember talking with several people during KubeCon. If you're interested in contributing, this will be a good starting point for yourself. It can be done several people at once, or there can be one person working on this topic. Generally, the initial task will be to figure out how to set up the testing, the new testing framework that the SIG testing has, how to make the initial part working. And when that is done, the work can be split over several people because we have 10 or 20 bash files that just need to be rewritten to Go. And once the initial move and we agree on the structure, then the work can be done in parallel. So it is one of the reasonably autonomous pieces where you can help with kubectl. And that will be very, very highly appreciated by each and every single SIG CLI contributor and member, because it is a major effort for splitting the kubectl to the separate repo that we are undergoing for almost 2 years, if I remember correctly. So big shout outs to Sean and all the people that are helping him with this effort currently.
So I'll just take the time since I'm here to mention the test grid, since I'm going to be leaving in a few minutes, which looks very green, except for a couple of areas that look to be Google specific, in which I will dig into myself to ensure. There's the GKE and GKE serial, which are having problems, but the rest of it actually looks really green, like no flakes. So I think it looks like we've managed to solve a lot of the flakes that have been plaguing us. I'd like to give a shout out to Mikolai Radchuk, who actually worked on cleaning up some of those flakes. Thanks a lot, Mikolai. I think you're here today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mikolai. I'm going to shout out to Jordan because I remember approving at least a couple of his PRs in the bash testing for improving the stability of our tests along the way. So thanks a lot to both Mikolai and Jordan for the help on this one. Which reminds me that I haven't mentioned beforehand, but we have a role of a test on call, which is a person that is responsible for looking at our test grid, which is what Sean was just mentioning. I just added my name for the next 2 weeks, but if you're interested in, feel free to reach out to Sean, myself, or Phil, and we'll be more than happy to help you with how to perform the work, what is your responsibilities, and you can take over the test on call role for the next 2 weeks if you're interested in. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. In that case, I would like to move over to the main topics. Jingfang, request for the new repo CLI docs. Go ahead, Jingfang.
Hey, everybody. So thanks to Sean for giving us an update on the kube control dependencies and moving kube control into staging and get that thing into the kube control repo. So the topic I'm going to talk about is related to that. So basically, we need a new repo to hold the docs for kube control book. So before we wiped out the kube control repo, the kube control book, the source of truth for the kube control book was saved in a kube control repo. And when that was wiped out, we take the backup was saved. So now the source of truth was in the backup, but it's not in the kube control repo. So we need a new repo to hold the source of truth of the kube control book. And once we have that new repo, we can copy the docs from the backup repo to this new repo. And then I will change the setting on the Netlify side so that every change you put in the new repo will trigger a new deployment of the book. So without this repo, we were not able to update the kube control book. Does that make sense?
Yep, totally. Before we move with creating yet another repo, have we considered moving the kubectl book over to the main docs repository? I remember Phil at some point in time was discussing, and the SIG docs were interested in the book. I can't remember if that we had a follow-up on that one, whether we will want to have that merge into a single repository instead of having, I don't know, a couple of them each documenting its own thing.
By the main doc, you mean the
Kubernetes website. Yeah. Yeah.
So based on my understanding, so that one is from another repo, right? I'm not sure if we put the kube control repo there, it will be served as two different sites.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. I would be very cautious about having separate repo because at the end of the day, what is true is that we will decouple the release cycles for kubectl at some point in time from the main Kubernetes repo, in which case if we would migrate the main documentation repository, that would kind of hold us back because they would not update the site as frequently as we would want to see that being updated. I really like the fact that we beforehand we had the book be part of the main kubectl repo. How about just moving the kubectl book inside of the staging kubectl repository? Is that a problem if we keep it still connected, and then once we are fully separate from the kubectl, we will still have both docs and the code sitting one next to the other?
So you mean copy the docs into the staging kube control repo?
Yeah, exactly. I remember talking with Stefan some time ago, asking him whether actually the staging bot is capable of ignoring some directories. And he mentioned that it should be also possible. But I'm guessing just having all code in a single place would be just simpler for all of us. So just moving the book over to the current kubectl staging, which will at the end of the day be published to the kubectl repository, is probably the best options. And then we will have a very close coupling between the docs and the code itself. And it will be definitely easier for us not having too many repos. I'm just worried that we end up creating too many repos and it will be yet another burden that we will have to look after. So if there's this, I would just keep the current approach that we had beforehand.
Okay, that is fine.
Okay.
Want to say something?
Yeah, we would just have to wait until it reopens.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but it's still being served. But yeah, it's not a problem. Cool. I'm out.
Let's move it to the staging in that case.
Okay.
Okay. There is an update from Raul Garcia. He mentioned that the docs updates are not tied to releases. Docs get updates all the time. The release process only ensures that the documentation of the new features changes are documented. Right, but then we would still not have a release-based documentation. I'm hoping that there will not be the need for the version-based documentations. Hopefully, the changes won't be so dramatic, but then at the same time, new features will be introduced over time, and we will want to have the ability to document those. And this is where having the documentation inside of our own repo will make it easier for us to couple the actual kubectl release with a documentation release. Okay, are there any questions with regards to the kubectl book or suggestions? Okay, in that case, let's move on to the next topic. I see Ahmed showed his face, so I'm guessing the draft of plugin acceptance criteria for the centralized core index will be presented by him. Go ahead, Ahmed.
Hello, everyone. I see that Cornelius is here as well. Cornelius is the news contributor we have on Crew, and he has worked on this plugin acceptance criteria. So before I go into that, I want to talk a little bit about why do we even have a plugin acceptance criteria. So first of all, we have a centralized plugin index today. It's just how it came to be. all along, and it's still open for debate whether we should have a centralized plugin index or not. That said, we're actually trying to let people create their own plugin indexes and offer plugins themselves instead of having us review the plugin and accept it to the centralized repository. So I'm going to quickly present here. Let's see. Yep. So one second. If I go to okay, so if I go to the crew index repository today, you're going to see that we have a set of plugins that are here that we manually sit down and review. We don't review the source code for these. We basically perhaps just install and see what they do. And this is as far as we go. And when I click onto one of these plugins, anytime the plugin is updated, we basically go in and take a look at, okay, is this the person updating the plugin? Are they just updating the checksum and the version, that the tarball that the plugin is installed from? So this is as far as we go in terms of accepting a new plugin. So right now, while accepting a new plugin, we basically make the plugin go through an undocumented acceptance criteria, and we want to document this criteria. So if I go back to here, which is the plugin naming guide that we had for a while now. So in this guide, we're basically telling people, here are the naming guidelines that you should probably be following. For example, you don't try to do punctuation. Don't try to do punctuation and capitalization in your plugin names. Try to be specific. We're not going to accept generic names like kubectl login. It's not clear what it's referring to. And you should try to be unique instead of putting dibs on pretty generic words or verbs like view logs. You should maybe come up with a creative name. So the list goes on. What we're trying to do here is, we're trying to get people to write plugins that are not stepping on potentially in the toes of other plugins in the future. We're basically trying to say that if you name your plugin this way, yeah, we can have it. Otherwise, this is going to create a naming conflict. For example, if you create a plugin that is prefixed with GKE, but if the GKE team or OpenShift team in the future creates a plugin that is prefixed with the same name and has the same name, so we don't want to get into these situations, and we've been trying to prevent these plugins. So besides naming, another point I came across was the usefulness of the plugins. So that's why we've been trying to figure out, can we have a plugin acceptance criteria? So, and this is what Cornelius has been working on. So we have quite a few pull requests that are in the index repo that are new plugins that are waiting to be accepted, but we're not accepting them because we don't think they're either relevant or useful enough. And this is a subjective matter, right? So, and that's why we've been struggling with this. So the problem is that plugin curation turns out it's a pretty difficult problem. So this plugin criteria basically tries to document a systemic approach to accepting plugins. What we have here is basically saying okay, if the talk is already solved by kubectl, but you're writing a utility that makes the workflow easier, you're writing a wrapper that is pretty convenient, yeah, we can probably accept it. For example, there's an example here that basically says, okay, there's a plugin called view secret that could just let you automate this complicated kubectl command pipe to base 64. So we're okay with these sort of things because they provide a lot of convenience. Yeah. So similarly, if a task is solved by kubectl, but it's not solved very well with kubectl, you have to write additional code for it. We definitely accept those as well. A good example of that is the kubectl get all plugin. This kubectl get all command actually doesn't get all resources. So I think Cornelius has actually written a plugin called get-all, which actually gets everything from the API server. So examples like this go on and go on, but there are some gray areas. When we look at here, for example, let's say someone wants to write a plugin that installs, I don't know, Tiller or another service, another component or controller to the cluster. So we don't want to accept these plugins, mostly because, first of all, they're not relevant to most kubectl users, and they're one-off use. They're bootstrap scripts or install scripts. We don't want to have these sort of things that are just doing one-off and user never uses them again. for now, this is very opinionated. There's an open PR about this. I linked in the meeting notes. Please go ahead and take a look. Overall, we're basically looking at, this is what the plugin does. Here's the category that it falls into. And in terms of usability, we're not also super enforcing it right now, but we want the plugin to look like kubectl in terms of, if it actually is eligible to look like kubectl, basically. For example, if instead of using --ns flag, which is not really a thing in kubectl, we want you to use the standard flags, ideally from the CLI runtime library. So we are basically looking for feedback on this. Cornelius, if you have anything to add, please unmute and chime in as well. So basically, we're probably going to iterate on this proposal and see where it goes, if it helps us, decide plugins better. But we basically need community input here, I think.
Thanks, Ahmed. I have nothing to add, and I'm looking forward to feedback to the PR.
So yeah, we might actually keep this PR open for maybe over a month or something like that, and go through the existing plugins and see how they fit to the criteria and whether we should have accepted them or not in the first place. So this is going to be an exercise for us. But essentially, again, the problem is arising from the fact that there's a plugin curation.
Okay, yeah, I was about to propose to review the new criteria with regards to the existing plugins. I'll try to go through the PR, but it might take me some time to get into it, given my current time constraints. But yes, I really like and support this idea. We had some discussions with Ahmed during KubeCon in Barcelona as well. So thanks very much for stepping up and writing this down to both you and Cornelius.
Hey, no problem. I also had another last-minute topic. By the way, does anyone have anything to add to the topic before I move on to the next one?
Amit dragged me into this meeting because I was being bratty on the internet and mentioning possible security issues relating to these plugins. And he was like, well, if you have anything to say about possible security issues, please come to SIG CLI. So hello, SIG CLI. I've never been to you before. But because I got dragged into this meeting for this reason, I feel the need to pipe up and be like, I do think that there should be some eye kept out for the security content of these plugins, because I can think of multiple nefarious things to potentially do with such a thing. And, while I think the general, inclination of your average black hat is somewhat behind the people in this meeting in terms of their willingness and or ability to contribute to Kubernetes CLI, I think that that is a potential issue in the future, especially if this becomes big. And so I just want to pipe up and say that I think that that is a thing that we should be keeping an eye out for, because I have a feeling that not paying attention to this is eventually going to scale badly, if that makes any sense.
So there are a few topics that we discussed with Ahmed with regards to maybe not directly to security, but should help solve some of the secure-related issues, which is, first of all, currently Crew has a hard-coded index file. We're hoping to make, first of all, that index file configurable, which would allow vendors such as Google or Red Hat or Amazon to ship their Crew distributions, which will be pointing to their own curated index. And then they will be the ones responsible for ensuring the safetiness and ensure the security of the contents served from those repos. That's one thing. And additionally, on top of that, we would like to make the index configurable, not as in one, but so that it can point to several index files. That solves partially the security issues. Also, with regards to the main index that we are currently maintaining, I remember when we brought this to Liveness some time ago, we intentionally said that we don't want to go into the business of maintaining those. Although I am aware that with this becoming more and more popular, we'll have to take the responsibility of the contents within those repo, or at least ensure that the stuff that we accepted to the crew index is reasonably secure, to say the least, I'm guessing. Do you have any particular ideas how we could increase the trust model inside of the current implementation? As in, I don't know, some scanners that you think might be useful that we could invoke on the data that we serve from there, or maybe some additional checks for this the PRs that are submitting. I'm guessing that there's also this issue of if for example there's a plugin that relies on the CLI runtime and a CVE will be filled in for the CLI runtime, we will fix it. I'm guessing we would care knowing whether people consuming CLI runtime and serving the plugins are actually up to date with the current fixes for that library. So it goes down to both monitoring in one way or the other the binary itself, but as well the code repos for that binary.
So the reason we're running into this problem is because we're like, if you're familiar with Homebrew package manager on macOS, they are not also looking at the source code or maintaining, the packages themselves, right? If you go on RHEL or Debian, and if you do apt-get install grep, you would get a grep that is maintained by that company, right? There's a person at that company applying the patches from upstream regularly. But if you go to Homebrew and if you type brew install grep, it goes to some GitHub repository and it just pulls the code. It doesn't care what's in the code, right? So there's a matter of trust there. So the trust that we have is also similar, that we accept releases that are coming from the owner of the repository, and we look at whether the release itself is coming from the owner's, say, GitHub repository releases URL or something like that. So if the person who's developing the plugin, if they actually added code that is not good, or if they made the release just from their laptop instead of like an automated system, and if they uploaded the malicious release binary that we can't really peek into, then yeah, the problem I think is very much there. Brew solves this by trying to build everything from source themselves. They try not to install things that are not built from source. So that's their solution to that problem. But it's very unlikely that we'll probably go that route. So basically right now what we have is anything you install is basically your responsibility and you should figure out. And I think the same kind of applies to Helm charts. Helm charts also have a lot of images that come from a lot of random places, and running an arbitrary image in your cluster potentially can steal your credentials. So stuff like that.
It's basically the same problem as Docker had with the images that people are just randomly pulling and running from Docker Hub. There's one possible tiny little improvement that we could do over the current how you define the index files, as in we could have an additional flag stating whether an index file is a trusted one or not. And in case of an untrusted index file, we would just print a warning that this plugin is coming from an untrusted source, basically some kind of a big fat warning that you are relying on the author's repository. If you feel, or if you don't trust the author, here's the source code for that repository. Go please check yourself, or don't install, and put this as a question to the user just to make them basically agree with the untrusted index file. And at the same time, we should allow vendors to say, yes, my repository is trusted because I'm Google, I'm Red Hat, I'm Amazon, and the contents that is provided inside of my index is just what you mentioned, which means it is packaged, verified, and signed by myself. So yeah, I'm guessing that's probably the simplest and the most straightforward thing that we could start with. And I'm not saying this will solve the issue, but at least will make users more aware of I'm using untrusted source or not.
Yeah, it doesn't seem practical to say that we or whatever could curate, like could say that all of them are like safe. Like that isn't realistic for anybody, for users or for this group. But it does seem like if there's some sort of curation process and there's an index that has been curated where people are like, we think that these ones are okay, that like not having any sort of security eye on that does seem like it does lend an air of trust, though, to be like, well, we said that these ones are okay, you know? And so it seems like either, yeah, I mean, having some sort of check, like we've looked at this is one way to solve that, you know? Or just being like, we haven't looked at any of this. So, you know, just FYI, like security is not a part of this curation process, you know, caveat emptor, like fair enough. But I do think that like, because of the sort of semi-curated nature of it, I do think it lends an air of trust that I think generally people tend to be pretty security optimistic and like want to believe that things are good. And so I think that if you have a list of things that you're like, we think this looks nice, that I think often people will make assumptions based on that may or may not actually be true. If that makes sense.
But that only is true up to a certain point.
Sure.
And that means I did went through the checklist at the time when the PR was opened.
Right.
But that was half a year ago, or
right.
Who knows how long ago. In the meantime, this or that stuff happened in the Golang ecosystem or whatever the language that you wrote your plugin in. So that means in between then and now, something that we actually looked at might not necessarily still be secure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
no,
with all our good faith, we are not able to address that issue unless we have a dedicated person that will be looking at the current index and verifying the problem on a, I don't know, some periodic, like periodically every couple of days, weeks, whichever sounds reasonable. And given the nature of this being a community-driven index, I'm not sure that that's feasible.
That makes sense. I mean, again, I got dragged into this because I was being bratty on the internet.
I really appreciate it. I think we just needed to have this discussion at some point, and I think the prompting the user and saying that, hey, you're about to install something that we don't really do security reviews for is a pretty reasonable idea. There's a UX sacrifice to be made, but I think right now there's a full sense of trust from the users. Like if you go install Crew today and if you type Crew install foo, you might actually think that we vetted foo plugin in the first place, what we were told it didn't. So I totally agree.
Yeah, like it does put some responsibility on the people who are accepting the PRs into the index, but it doesn't solve the issue entirely. And by just adding that extra communication, I think it at least brings the awareness to broader set of users. Yeah.
And I mean, if you have like different plugin indexes in the future, like let's say a user they'll be able to tap into a Google or Red Hat index. We'll just prompt them again and say, do you want to trust everything in this index? And if they say yes, I mean, from that point on, it's not onto us. We're just a vehicle that carries bits, and they already trusted that. So yeah, I think this is a fair approach.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Are there any other suggestions, questions with regards to the security topic? Because it's very important one. So definitely big thanks to both of you for bringing this up and having that discussion, because it's definitely something important to be aware of and to have the discussion on. Okay, hearing none. In that case, I'm going to open the table for stand-ups. If you want to share with the group the stuff that you are currently working on, you are planning to work on, or you've been working on in the past couple of weeks, now is your time. Okay, hearing none. With that, I think we can close the meeting for today. Thank you very much all for attending our meeting, and see you in 2 weeks. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out on Slack or the mailing list. Thank you all. Bye.
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 Bye.